Today I'm joined by, well, in the Western Hockey League, he'd be the Joe Thornton of play-by-play broadcasters, but in the NHL, I guess he's the Alexei Lafreniere. He's the new guy. It is former Red Deer Rebels play-by-play man, current Edmonton Oilers play-by-play man on 630 Ched. It is Cam Moon. Cam, congratulations, and how have the first couple days in Edmonton been?
Thanks. It's been hectic. This came together so quick that you barely catch my breath and get up here and cram like I've never crammed before to get ready for broadcasts, but starting to get my feet under me a little bit here. It's been a lot of fun in a very short amount of time.
Well, let's talk about how quick that turnaround was. This came, I found out about this early Monday morning before the announcement came. I knew that you'd be having to work a game at least, maybe at the earliest Wednesday, but for sure on Thursday night. What do you do when you find out, hey, you're going to be going to the NHL to do a play-by-play game? Here is 40 names you need to memorize. You need to understand who these guys are. Oh, and by the way, regular season game starts in 3 days. So get ready, kid. How did that feel? And what did you do to get ready?
It was overwhelming. Like last Thursday, I was walking my dogs in the afternoon without a care in the world. And it was, next thing you know, a phone call, a couple of interviews. I found out Sunday, it got announced Monday. Tuesday morning, honestly, I was throwing clothes in my vehicle. I have no idea if I have got the right stuff. I took whatever I could and drove up here to be at practice for Tuesday, to watch Wednesday, to broadcast Thursday. So yeah, it was tough. I had to do a lot of cramming, get as much information as I could, as quick as I could, and try to simplify as much as I could. And I didn't want to try and do too much. And my head's just not smart enough to handle too much information all at once. So I had to slow it down a little, keep it simple. And once I got the first one under my belt, I'll feel a lot better. And that knowledge is going to grow as time goes on. So I'm looking forward to getting a few weeks under my belt, but it was crazy quick. It wasn't something I was looking for, but I sure am glad that it found me.
Well, Cam, I think let's talk about that game last night that you called. It was your first ever NHL game. I'm sure you were nervous, but there's such a cool moment that happens because the first goal you ever call in the NHL for the Edmonton Oilers is Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, a guy that you know very well, a guy that you got to see and develop in the Western Hockey League. And what was that moment like for yourself?
It was unbelievable. I couldn't believe it. Like I wanted the Oilers to play real well. I thought they had a bit of a slow start on Wednesday night, certainly in the first period. And then maybe a little bit of bad luck halfway through the game where some chances it didn't go in for Edmonton and then did for Vancouver. I figured they'd come out pretty hot, and they did. And then when Ryan scored, it just seemed like so fitting that that's the way it went. So I was happy because I always want to see Ryan do well. I'm so biased. I wouldn't have been upset if Brandon Sutter got a goal too, former Red Deer Rebel on the other side. I certainly wanted an Oilers win, but if Brandon would have got one too, that would have been really good. But I was happy for Ryan. I want to see him score, and I see him get two. It was crazy. Like it's funny how life goes sometimes. And here we are right now.
Yeah, 2021. It's going to be a good year for everybody. You know, it started a little bit rough. You know, we had almost an insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, but you know what? We bounced back. I actually not very happy with you. Wednesday nights, the Canucks win. You're not working the game. Thursday night, the Canucks lose. You're working the game. So maybe on the Canucks games, we just sit those ones out from here on because the Canucks need those wins.
Well, the Oilers needed that one bad. I mean, if you listen to the sports talk radio here in town, there was a bit of panic, I think. Typical. That's how it is in Canadian markets, where we get really excited when they win and right in the dumps when they lose. But yeah, it was I thought the Oilers played really well last night.
Yeah, the best thing about the Canadian, especially Vancouver, Edmonton, Toronto, Montreal, team could go on a 10-game winning streak and it's all roses, but then they lose one and then the GM should get fired.
That's it.
Yeah, you know all about that. Let's go down memory lane, though. 22 years
Mm-hmm.
with the Red Deer Rebels. I think I'd assume, this is an assumption on my part, but the 2001 Memorial Cup team has to be one of your best years. And can you just kind of remember any big games or big plays or players that really stuck out in your mind about that year's team? And what was it like to be, you were with the team for 3 years at that point, to go to the Memorial Cup and then to win the Memorial Cup as well?
Well, going into that year, it was expected the team was going to be pretty good. The year before, they were good enough to get into the playoffs, got beat 4 straight by Kootenay in the first round, but Kootenay went on to win the WHL that year. So no shame in that. But a lot of guys coming back and a lot of key players. So the idea was, okay, this team's going to be pretty good. And then out of the gate, they were. A big trade made it the WHL trading deadline. Martin Erat was a huge part of that, coming over from the Saskatoon Blades. That helped a lot too. But from the middle of December on, that team never lost 2 games in a row, including the playoffs. And if you think about that, that's a lot of hockey, a lot of road trips, back-to-back nights on the road, all sorts of things, and yet they never lost 2 in a row. I remember when the team went through the U.S. road trip and going out there and sweeping it. Like, that in itself is really difficult. It's a ton of travel. I remember a 1-0 game in Portland, the team that the Rebels played in the WHL final that year. But in the regular season, it was a 1-0 win in Portland. It was just an amazing game. There were so many cool moments. And one that I'll never forget, this is unbelievable when I think about it. It's the last game of the trip. The team's in Tri-Cities. So they've won every game. They've got a pretty healthy lead in the third period. And if you know where the press box is in Tri-Cities, it's really not that high up. And it's right up and over. It's a beautiful location. And there's a face-off in the Tri-City end. And Bryce Toma played for the Rebels for 4 years, then went to the U of S and was an assistant coach with Red Deer for years too after he was done playing pro, is coming onto the ice from the bench. And the press box is across from the ice. Toma skates out in a real methodical, kind of slow way onto the ice before the face-off, looks up at me, makes eye contact, gives me the little nod. They drop the puck. It goes back to Toma, puts it towards the net, rebound, score, because of course they did. And I think it ended up like 6-2 or something. There was that confidence in that team. It was a great bunch of guys. Justin Mappletoft wins the WHL scoring title that year with 120 points. And a guy was lights out from start to finish. Martin Erat won the WHL scoring in the playoffs. He was amazing. Shane Bandera was the playoff MVP in goal. Unbelievable. And then the Memorial Cup in Regina was just crazy. It was just so much fun. A lot of people from Red Deer were able to drive to Regina. So it had a bit of a hometown feel, at least when they weren't playing the Pats. So that was pretty cool too. And during that playoff run, in the second round, Rebels lost the first game to the Calgary Hitmen. Actually, the Rebels lost the first game of the first 3 series that year in the playoffs, but they lose to Calgary at home. The second game goes to overtime. And I remember thinking, geez, if they drop this and go down 2-0 heading back to Calgary, that's a real tough road home. And Colby Armstrong scores a goal on a wraparound that brought the house down. Like, it was so loud, you couldn't talk to the person next to you. And it was such a special feeling. So there's something about a WHL playoff run where the whole town gets involved that I think is amazing. And it doesn't matter what WHL city you're in, it's that same feeling. And it's just so fun to be around. And that year was incredibly special.
Absolutely was. There's what's funny is you go through the names on that list and there's guys that were WHL scoring leaders that never really accomplished much in the pros, but then on that team as well, there's Martin Erat and there's Colby Armstrong and there's guys that ended up going on to the NHL having very long, very successful careers. And that's kind of what it takes, is you need that mix of everybody on a great team, as I'm sure you know. But when you look back on your career, what do you think is the worst call that you ever had? It's the one that sticks out in your mind that the second it came out of your mouth, you were like, oh my God, I can't believe I just said that.
Oh, there's probably a bunch of those. Yeah, I'm sure the key is to just get past it. Don't dwell on it. Just move on. If you don't make a big deal out of it, nobody else will either. But yeah, there's got to be a bunch, especially when you're like on the road and you're doing the game by yourself, and maybe it's the third game in 4 nights, and sleep, you haven't got a lot of it. So I mean, you're not like the sharpest you need to be. That certainly happens because of the travel and stuff. And or if I try to do, especially after like 3 games of 4 nights, and you try to do math in your head while you're broadcasting, like when you're figuring out if 2 goals were relatively close together, and I'm quickly trying to decipher in my head the time gap between the 2 goals. Yeah, God knows I've butchered the heck out of that over the years because you don't really have time to figure it out. You're figuring it out in your head as you're talking. So I'm not sharp enough to do that all the time. So there's been a few of those.
I think one of the coolest things about, having played in the Western Hockey League, like you did as well, you were a goaltender in the Western Hockey League, is you get to know the communications guys, the play-by-play guys, and the broadcasters really well because of those road trips. You're with them on the bus. You guys are talking pregame meals, and you really get to know the players from your position. And one of the cool things that I found is that there's guys that come into the Western Hockey League that there's no expectations on them. They're just kind of there to fill a role, but they turn into guys that over the years end up developing into NHL players. I mean, for myself, I look back at Jordan Martinick was a good example of this. He was a guy that was just supposed to come in, but then turned into an assistant captain now with the Carolina Hurricanes. Is there a guy with the Rebels that you saw over the years you were there that you didn't really have expectations on that ended up becoming an NHL hockey player?
Well, one of them that comes to mind right off the hop is Jim Vandermeer, who was the captain of that Memorial Cup team in 2001. Jim made the team as a 17-year-old and only played about half the games, and was sometimes a forward and sometimes a D, and just filled in where he had to fill in. And then the next year at 18, he played defense all the time, but like not a big role. And then at 19, he made a pretty big jump, and you're like, it didn't hurt that he was tough as heck, and he got into a ton of tilts at 19 back when those sorts of things happened, and started to develop into a guy that you could, play top 4. And then at 20, he was clearly the captain. His leadership skills were off the charts. There was no question this was the guy that was running everything. And the buck stopped with Jim. If you needed something done, you just say, Jim, this is what needs to be done, and it's done. Like, you never even had to worry about it. He was 20 going on 35. And his role increased to the point where he was like a top defenseman. He signs a free agent contract with Philadelphia that year. And then his rights got traded to Chicago. And then he played in the NHL in Chicago, and I believe he was in Edmonton as well, San Jose, Vancouver. There's a guy that, at 17 years old, he was never drafted in the WHL. He was never drafted in the NHL, but had a really good career in the NHL because he worked so hard and was such a good guy.
My last question for you. Mm-hmm. You're in the NHL now. What are you most excited about this year in your new position?
It's a couple of things. The first thing is just being able to call NHL hockey. But when you get right down to it, it's still hockey. Like, it's everything. The lights are pretty bright, and there's huge attention on it for sure. But when the puck drops and the broadcast starts, it's really not much different than what I've been doing in Red Deer. It's still the game, and you still need to call it and capture the excitement and the essence of being in the rink for the people that aren't in the rink. And right now, nobody's in the rink. So now I really need to capture the essence of the game without the addition and the help of fans making noise. I don't have that luxury, but that's okay because I can get jacked up about this without having people there. And the second thing, quite honestly, is coming to Edmonton. I grew up here. I watched the Oilers as a little kid. I went to so many Oiler games with my dad, and I got a lot of buddies here, and I've got a lot of ties and roots, and you name it. But this is my hometown. And I'm as excited to be back in Edmonton because I love it so much as I am to be working in the NHL. There's no place I'd rather be.
Well, There's no place you'd rather be. It's a full circle story now that you're finally back home at Edmonton with the Oilers. You got one game under your belt. I hope that you have several hundred to 1,000 more. As much as we would like to see you back in the WHL, we'd much rather see you stay up in the NHL. So Cam, congratulations again on all your success. And I wish you the best, not just play by play, but staying healthy and staying in it, enjoying what you can this year. It's going to be awesome. Congratulations.
All right. Thanks, Zach. Thanks so much for having me.